Have you ever had one of those embarrassing moments when you suddenly wanted to be somewhere else? Anywhere, but just not here. Now we know that Joseph was promoted to second in charge over all of the nation of Egypt, and his main task was to ensure that there was enough food stored away to last through the 7 years of drought that Pharaoh had dreamt about. Joseph had managed it very well. But as the drought began to bite, people began to struggle. The pain was felt right across the land and even into the neighbouring countries. Even Joseph's own family back home began to feel the pressure. Now it happened that Joseph's father Jacob heard that there was grain to spare in Egypt. So he sent some of his sons down there to buy some grain so that his family might survive this terrible drought. Of course, when the brothers arrived in Egypt, who did they have to come before but their own brother Joseph, although they didn't recognise him. If they had, they would have wanted to be somewhere else. They just assumed that he was a high-ranking Egyptian official who was there to give them a hard time. On the other hand, Joseph had immediately recognised these 10 men as his brothers. He acted as though he had never seen them before, and he questioned them as though he thought that they were spies spying out the land for their own purposes. I suppose it would have been difficult for them to recognise this man as their younger brother, because he was dressed like an Egyptian and he even spoke in the Egyptian language. Besides that, they had no idea what had happened to Joseph since they had sold him off as a slave to those traders all of those years ago. Joseph did let them have some grain. He sold it to them, but he had his officials put the money back into their sacks of grain just before they left for home. Excuse me. He did, however, keep one of the brothers in Egypt as surety that the brothers would return with their younger brother as well. Now, when they arrived home and began unloading the grain, they discovered that all of the money that they had paid for the grain was there in the bags, and they began to fear for their lives. Now, this is an amazing account of a family who had moved to another nation, not because they wanted to, rather because they had to, because they were in survival mode. Eventually, the whole family moved to Egypt. Now, the casual observer may have to ask, where is God in all of this? Why was there such a dramatic drought? Why was poor old Jacob put through such a time of anxiety and worry? The whole story is summarised well in Genesis chapter 45, as Joseph asked his attendants to leave the room so that he could be alone with his brothers. They really must have wondered what was going to happen. And then Joseph broke down and wept loudly. Well, wouldn't you? It was then that he announced that he was Joseph. Yes, I think the brothers would have wanted to be somewhere else. What a moment! Joseph said to his brothers, "Don't be upset and angry with yourselves for selling me to this place. It was God who sent me here ahead of you to preserve your lives." Later on, he was to say, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. Now, how about you? Do you still struggle to understand why something in life has happened to you? Why did God allow me to go through that terrible pain? Did I really have to go through that horrible time when I was in the wilderness? What good can ever come out of all of that experience, you may ask? Let me remind you that God will never waste anything. We may never know during this earthly life, but we do need to be like Joseph and trust that God intends for all of us to experience good things in our lives. I love Romans 8:28, one of my favourite verses. It reminds us that all things work together for good to those who love God and are fitting into his plans. Joseph knew that God was with him, and clearly he spoke to him regularly. But more than that, he listened. There's still so much for you and I to discover about the goodness of God. There always will be more, but I think that is worth thinking about. I trust that you have a wonderful week, and may God richly bless you.